2. The house with the yellow door. When I close my eyes, I still taste the flaking lead paint dust that drifted from the ceiling joists of that house on Juniper and Fifth. It settles on the back of the tongue like an accusation no toothbrush can erase. The yellow door, jaundiced, desperate, pretending sunlight was its false welcome, a grin painted over rot. The first night we moved in, rain drummed on warped shingles while my mother hummed in the kitchen, coaxing optimism from canned soup. She said the door reminded her of fields of mustard in her childhood, said we were lucky to live on a corner where light could find us from 2 streets instead of 1. But I watched the watermarks blooming on the ceiling like bruises, and I could tell the house was already telling a different story. My stepfather Hank parked himself in the living room recliner, beer angled on one thigh, eyes on the static blurred ball game. He barely acknowledged the boxes stacked like barricades between us. He was a man of few words but many temperatures. The cold of his dismissal could curdle silence, while the heat of his laugh, when it came, sudden and sharp, scalded everything near. The house absorbed him the way mildew absorbs damp, quietly, relentlessly. Downstairs, the basement smelled of old newspapers and grudges. Water seeped through cinder-block seams, leaving mineral ghosts on the floor. I imagined the foundations sucking moisture from the earth the way Hank sucked the marrow of patience from my mother. Each time I ventured down to fetch a jar of peaches or the laundry basket, the bulb's filament flickered, and my pulse jumped with the thought that the darkness itself was breathing. But the attic was an island. A single dormer window faced west, catching sunsets like fragile fires in glass. There, the leak in the roof dripped steady as a metronome, a small mercy in its predictability. I spread an old quilt beneath the slow puncture and lay on my stomach, sketchbook open, listening to water compose its slender music. I drew houses that stood straight and clean, clapboard washed in gentle blues, windows unbroken, doors the color of mid-ocean. No porches sagged under the weight of disappointment, no hinges shrieked at midnight. I drew until my wrist cramped, and dusk swallowed the last orange seam of sky. Then I folded my drawings, slid them into a shoebox against the eave, and descended to face whatever temperature Hank had chosen for the evening. Seasons passed in layered damp. Winter pushed frost through the attic leaks, so the slow drip became a brittle hiss of ice forming on my quilt. Spring loosens shingles. The rhythm resumed, faster now, frantic, as though the roof were learning to speak in code. Summer brought a heat that wilted wallpaper into slick ribbons and filled the basement with a scent like wet cardboard morning itself. Through every season, the yellow door faded under sun and rain, color peeling in curls that reminded me of scabbed skin. At 17, diploma in hand, I left before dawn. The street lamps still burned, and the house slouched behind me, door half lit and strangely toothless without the sunlight it once counterfeited. I did not look back. Some departures must remain unwitnessed, lest you doubt your own velocity. 5 years later, the headline drifted across a hometown feed: corner house gutted by electrical fire. There was a photo, charred rafters clawing at night, the door a blackened hole. Investigators blamed outdated wiring, but I knew rot is a slow flame long before it becomes visible. Now I live in cities where streets change names before they learn to haunt me. I rent apartments with cold blue doors, cobalt, cerulean, indigo hues that swallow sorrow and leave the threshold clean. Whenever I cross a yellow door in some neighborhood, I feel the old taste of paint dust rise in the back of my throat. I switch sidewalks not out of fear but refusal. I will not grant passage to the memory that waits behind that color. Yet some nights, when rain finds the gutters outside my window and drums a rhythm too familiar, I reach for the shoebox I still keep under the bed. I unfold a drawing. A house with a blue door, roof unbroken, light in every room. I press my palm to the paper until the lines warm under my skin, and I tell myself softly, fiercely, that hope is not always denial, but sometimes the map that leads you out. Still, in the hush between heartbeats, I wonder, if a door can lie about sunshine, what lies might I have painted over my own escape? Sometimes the past doesn't knock. It slips a yellow envelope beneath the frame and waits for you to trip over it barefoot. Mine arrived on a Tuesday that smelled of jasmine and subway grease. 2 smells that should never coexist but do, the way memory braids comfort and rot. I found the envelope wedged under my blue-painted door, its color an uncanny echo of those mustard fields my mother once conjured. Inside, a single page, official, terse, notice of scheduled demolition, 412 Juniper Street. The corner house, the one I'd vowed never to name again. The city intended to level it in 30 days. Replace it with a half-acre of townhomes boasting sunrise palettes and walkable charm. They cited black mold, foundational shift, electrical hazards, bullet points I could have drafted at 9. At the bottom, a bureaucratic courtesy. Former occupants may claim personal effects prior to raise. The words sizzled against my skin like static caught in wool. For years I'd nourished a private fantasy that the house would crumble quietly, swallowed by its own damp lungs, sparing me any witness. Now the city wanted paperwork, signatures, perhaps even closure. That night the ceiling fan ticked like a clock with palpitations. Sleep skittered from corner to corner. At 3 a.m. I rose, opened the shoebox and flipped through my sketches, blue-doored sanctuaries, each more impossible than the last. Between 2 pages, I found a Polaroid I'd forgotten, 9-year-old me in front of the yellow door, holding a cardboard sword. My mother kneels beside me, her smile brave as dental tape. Behind us, Hank's outline looms in the window glass. Even blurred, his posture leans like a question left too long unanswered. I packed a duffel at dawn. Gloves, respirator mask, flashlight, and the Polaroid. Proof that once we had occupied the same coordinates as Hope. I booked a train just late enough that I wouldn't arrive until evening, when the house's silhouette might hide its worst truths in shadow. The ride south felt like descending a staircase carved from old voicemail messages. Stations blurred, names derailed by humidity, graffiti blooming over timetables. I kept the envelope folded in my pocket, its corners stabbing my thigh each time I shifted. Across the aisle, a toddler traced rain on the window glass, her fingertip inventing rivers that vanished as quickly as they formed. As dusk settled, the train hissed into a station 2 towns from my childhood. I rented a sedan whose interior smelled of new plastic, an odor arrogant enough to promise invulnerability. Driving those last miles, I noticed how the map of familiar streets had been redrawn by time, the video store reborn as a vape lounge, the bakery gutted into self-storage lockers, the school bus yard converted to a field of solar panels tilting like silent applause. Yet some landmarks defy revision. When the yellow house emerged at the end of Juniper, it looked shrink-wrapped in its own desolation, siding sagging, windows boarded, door still the color of infected light, though paint peeled in ragged strips. The city had posted warning placards. Danger, structurally unsound. I ducked beneath yellow tape, another jaundiced barrier, and tested the porch. Boards groaned but held. The lock was gone, supplanted by a rusted hasp that gave way with a shrug. Inside, the smell hit first. Damp wood laced with a darker sweetness, like syrup gone feral. My flashlight beam caught motes spiraling. Each particle, a tiny archive of years uncleaned. Wallpaper slumped in damp shawls. The living room floor bowed where Hank's recliner once anchored gravity. I followed memory by sonar. Each creak, each shift of stale air guided me. Past the kitchen with its avalanche of mold-laced tiles. Down the basement stairs veined with rust. The washer still squatted in the corner, lid cocked like a question never fully asked. Water glistened along the floor, reflecting the flashlight as though the house housed a subterranean sky. I scanned for salvageable artifacts, maybe my mother's recipe tin, or the ceramic bird she collected pennies in, but the basement offered only the music of drip and echo. I ascended, heart hammering against mask fabric, and aimed for the attic, my island. On the staircase, my foot punched through a tread, sending a bloom of rot dust upward. Coughing, I hauled myself free, palms slivered and continued. The attic door resisted, swollen with years of storms. When it finally yielded, a gust of stale heat met me, thick with insulation fuzz and something sharper. Smoke? Had the fire reached this far before being doused? The roof leak had widened. Moonlight speared through, illuminating the quilt I'd left behind. It lay curled like a fossilized wave, still bearing the faint rings of old water stains. Near the eave, the shoebox remained, though lid warped. I knelt and opened it. Inside, my sketches had fused together, pages glued by humidity into an inseparable gospel of impossible homes. But atop the stack rested something new, a small tin soldier, blue paint flaked along its coat. I hadn't owned soldiers. Hank collected them, lining the mantel like silent jurors. Why had one migrated here? I picked it up. Beneath, a scrap of paper, handwriting shaky but unmistakably my mother's. If you ever come back, remember, yellow fades, but it also lets the blue through. A floorboard cracked behind me. I whirled, flashlight beam slicing dust. No one, just the house exhaling a memory too heavy. Yet the air vibrated, subtle, as though a low-frequency note had been plucked into existence. My father, no. Hank, impossible. He'd left 2 years before the fire. Destination unknown. Still, the house felt newly occupied, each shadow thick with the possibility of presence. The vibration grew, not sound but trembling, localized near the attic window. I approached. Rain began outside, soft taps on broken shingles. Each tap synced with the tremor until window pane and floorboards shuddered in shared pulse. Lightning flashed, and for a split second, the yellow door below glowed like a lantern resurrected from ash. I felt the soldier heat in my fist, metal warming with a pulse not my own. The note from my mother fluttered, then settled again. Behind me the attic door thumped as though someone pressed a palm against it, testing entry. And in that charged darkness, midpoint between water leak lullaby and imminent collapse, I understood demolition wasn't the only countdown. Whatever had burned 5 years ago had left embers in the grain, waiting for oxygen. My return was the spark. I slid the soldier into my pocket, tucked the note beside it, and stepped toward the attic door, heart drumming a rhythm older than wires, older even than rot. Outside, thunder rolled, the sound of foundations clearing their throats. What decides the moment when a house stops keeping our secrets and starts releasing them, one electric shiver at a time? The attic door buckled inward on its bent hinges, sighing like lungs too long starved of air. I held the flashlight ready, beam jittering across rafters furred with cobweb lace. Nothing stepped through. Only the wind sluicing up the stairwell carried a scent of scorched plaster and old beer, Hank's phantom cologne. Boards beneath my feet tremored. Somewhere inside the house a relay clicked, unfurling a hum that crawled the wiring like a restless animal. Power had been cut years ago, yet bulbs down the hallway flickered, hemorrhaging weak amber, the yellow of rot, the yellow of that door seeping from sockets like jaundiced light. I descended, every step a splintered telegram. In the corridor the walls sweated resin, wallpaper puckering into blisters that burst to reveal scorched lath. Electricity, imaginary or resurrected, pulsed through outlets, singing a faint metallic psalm. It gathered in the living room where Hank's recliner once ruled. There, the floor sagged around a blackened crater, the heart of the fire. Ash dust spiraled upward in my flashlight, forming shapes half human, half smoke, disintegrating when I blinked. The humor sharpened, pitched to headache frequency. I traced it to the basement door. Its knob was slick with mold, yet warm as though gripped moments ago by living skin. I opened it. A stair of water-dark steps descended into breathing dark. With every tread the air grew denser, thick with damp and the copper taste of burnt circuits. At the bottom the sump pit gurgled. A bare bulb, the one that always flickered, now blazed steady, its filament a white nerve. Beneath it stood the fuse box, porcelain switches fused in the on position, though the main feed cable had melted years before. Sparks dandled like fireflies around the corroded metal. On the concrete at my feet lay another tin soldier, blue coat intact, rifle raised. Beside it, a beer bottle, Hank's brand, half full, label recent. A shuffle sounded behind the furnace. I swung the light. A silhouette lurched, shoulders broad, retreating. Hank. The name left my throat raw. No reply, only the clank of something metallic against pipe. I followed, nerves thumping arrhythmia. Around the boiler, footprints glistened in the thin film of water, boot impressions, fresh, leading toward the crawl space. I crouched, ducking beneath ductwork. The crawl space mouth exhaled chill. Within, the hum concentrated, a hive of unseen wasps. I crawled on hands and knees, flashlight clamped in teeth, soldier in pocket, heavy as a verdict. Ahead, the yellow beam struck a wall of wiring, an improvised web of extension cords knotted and spliced, coursing with impossible current. At the center, a gaping outlet sparked like a miniature sun. Pinned above it, tacked to joists by rusty nails, hung my childhood sketches. Pages torn from the fused notebook, peeled apart and spread like wings. Blue doors scorched to sepia at the edges, houses blistered by heat, yet the ink of their lines glowed alive, convulsing with every surge of power. Each drawing pulsed, and with each pulse the outlet spat a filament of white-hot light, burning new wounds into paper. The house was eating my blue doors, soldering them into its own circuitry. From the black behind me, a voice rolled low, slurred, soaked in static. "Thought you could paint over me, huh, Hank?" The timbre chilled the marrow. I turned. The flashlight beam lanced empty space, caught only dust eddies. Footsteps retreated, then stopped. "Show yourself." My shout cracked against joists. Silence answered, then a laugh, tar-thick, echoing from every stud. The house laughed with him. A jolt rippled through wires, blowing the bulb behind me. Darkness slammed shut, broken by sparking arcs. I yanked the sketches free. As each page tore loose, the humming faltered, chords sagging like wilted veins. But heat built behind the walls, the structure groaning, nails popping in studs. I crawled backward, sketches clutched to chest. A boom shook the basement, joists splitting, timbers ablaze from inside the grain where electricity had found sap to ignite. At the stairs, fire licked up drywall seams, blue and hungry. Smoke churned. I staggered upward, lungs snagging on soot. In the hall, the wallpaper flared into ribbons of flame, the house illuminating itself from core to skin. Hank's laughter roared, then dissolved into a crackling roar of beams collapsing. Maybe he'd never been here at all. Maybe the house remembered him too vividly, replaying his weight until it burned through. I reached the yellow door. Flames gnawed the jamb, paint bubbling into pustules that burst and bled resin. The knob seared my palm, yet the door clung closed, warped. I rammed it with a shoulder. Wood splintered. The night outside gulped me into cool air. On the lawn I collapsed, sketches scattering like injured birds. Firelight blazed through broken windows, casting the house's crooked skeleton onto the street. One last grotesque lantern. Sirens wailed somewhere distant, slow and reluctant, as if they too doubted the point of rescue. I watched the door devour itself, yellow giving way to black. In the heat shimmer, I saw an afterimage, a blue door standing where the yellow had been, not painted, but born of flame, brief as mercy. Then it too vanished. Ash drifted down, soft as snowfall. I gathered the surviving sketches, edges charred, lines warped, yet the doors remained blue, pigment unbent by heat. I pressed them to my chest, breath wheezing smoke. When the engines arrived, the roof had already folded inward, a final genuflection. Water arced from hoses, hissing into ruin. Steam billowed, tasting of copper and doused grief. I stepped back as sparks leapt skyward, tiny souls freed from wire. And over the crackle and siren howl, a question threaded itself, ember bright, impossible to silence. If a house can burn the lies we built inside it, what remains of us once the last wall collapses? Ghosts, or the truth we were too fragile to bear? Night lingered long after the engines coughed away, leaving only a skeletal hush and the wet smell of soaked timber. I stayed crouched at the curb until dawn bled raw peach over the ruins. The corner lot simmered, white smoke coiling from joists like breath from a tired animal. Where the yellow door had stood, there was now a gap shaped exactly like absence, an outline you could step through if you trusted emptiness to hold. My palms blistered where the knob had branded them. Each pulse of blood beneath the burns felt like a small bell, tolling the hour of something overdue. I wrapped my hands in the torn hem of my shirt and drifted toward the wreckage, siren echo still ghosting the air. Char shivered underfoot. One step sank ankle-deep into ash that clung with insolent warmth, as though memory kept its own embers. In the center of the shell lay the basement stairwell, exposed to the open sky. Steam rose from it like a prayer losing structure. I peered down. Water pooled at the bottom, black and reflective, lit by no source yet faintly luminous, as though the house's swallowed secrets, unshackled, had begun to glow. Compulsion tugged. I descended, each tread groaning under new burdens of physics. The water met my boots, seeped cold through seams. Beneath the surface, the improvised web of cords still twitched, sparking feebly, blue veins under translucent skin. They writhed like roots deprived of soil. At the bank floated Hank's beer bottle, label char curled. I nudged it, liquid the color of tarnished gold spilled, mixing with ash until both dissolved. Something flickered below, a square of pale blue wavering like trapped sky. I reached in, the water seared icy, yet my blistered hands felt nothing but a distant throb. Fingers closed on cardboard, one of my sketches somehow uncharred, ink lines bright as first intent. As I lifted it, droplets beaded and rolled, refusing to stain the page. The drawing showed a house unlike any I had drafted before. The familiar cobalt door, yes, but the walls were transparent, revealing a knot of stairs looping inward with no exit, a Mobius interior where every corridor returned to itself. Across the threshold, a single sentence had appeared in handwriting not mine, and not my mother's, letters trembling as if still cooling. Homesick is a direction, not a place. Wind knifed through the broken rafters. It carried a smell, faint, metallic, unmistakable, blood. I followed it up the stairs, over buckled flooring, to the place where Hank's recliner had once dented carpet. There, in a shallow hollow of ash, lay a third tin soldier. Its paint blistered away, exposing raw lead that glimmered wet. Blood beaded on its bayonet tip and trailed into the ruins of the hallway. I stepped after the spore. Floorboards groaned, but did not fail. It felt as if the wreck itself bent roots for my passing. The trail curved into what had been my mother's bedroom. Half the exterior wall had collapsed, leaving the room open to sun. Charred rafters framed sky in jagged teeth. In that crude atrium, the blood trail ended at a scorched black dresser miraculously intact. Within its top drawer, a bundle wrapped in satin scorched at the edges, tied with twine. I eased it open. Letters. Many, brittle, addressed to no one. Written in Hank's handwriting. Each page a confession whose grammar slurred and stumbled. but across them a single refrain repeated like a stuck record. I can't hear the yellow anymore. The dates spanned the last year we lived together. The ink changed from firm to frantic, words angling off the lines as though fleeing the margins. On the final page, a ragged circle of scorched paper replaced the text, center burned out, leaving only the sentence fragment, and if the house can't forgive, then let it sing. Heat swelled behind me. I turned. The dresser reflected fire that had no source. Flames unfurled silently along the room's periphery, licking upward without smoke, colorless yet bright enough to cast shadows. They formed a ring, not spreading, simply containing. Inside the circle, the air thickened, rippled, until a figure stepped through, Hank, or the shape of him, rendered in coal and light, no details, only silhouette, broad shoulders, bottle-tilt carriage, laugh stiff as rust. He didn't speak. The house spoke through him. Timbers creaking syllables, nails popping consonants. Yellow was a mouth, it said, voice layered, his baritone underscored by crackle and water drip. You tried to paint it shut. My throat tightened. What do you want? The silhouette raised a hand. The invisible fire galloped inward one pace, heat pressing like a hand on my sternum. I want the note, the house said. Blue hides rot. I glanced at my pocket where my mother's slip of paper rested, words about yellow fading. You can't have it. The silhouette's arm fell. The ring of flame contracted. Floorboards inside began to blacken, curling. Heat scalded my lungs. I clutched the letters, the sketch, the note, all that remained of every unspoken corridor between us. Suddenly, I saw the water pooling in the basement, saw cords gasping like dying eels, saw Hank's refrain about hearing yellow. The house didn't crave the note. It craved its contradiction, needed me to feed proof of any other color into its furnace of memory. I backed to the ragged hole in the wall, sunlight at my shoulders. Below, the grass glistened with dew. One leap could unbind me from the circle, but the letters in my hand throbbed, weight of Hank's ruin, weight of silence offered too late. Dropping them felt wrong, keeping them felt fatal. I pressed the bundle of his letters against my bandaged palm until blood seeped through gauze marking the paper. Then, with a breath dredged from miles below grief, I tossed the bundle into the center of the ring. Flames rose swift and blue, devouring envelope and confession alike. The silhouette flickered, shrank, its edges caving inward as if pressure withdrew. The ring widened, light flattened, then blinked out, leaving only sunlight and scorching smell. A hush fell, so sudden I heard the dust settle. The silhouette gone, the room bare. I stepped forward, the floor held. In the ash where fire had burned, a single object remained, the tin soldier, now molten, fused into a small puddle of lead that cooled mirror smooth. I bent, breath trembling, and in its dulled reflection, I saw not the house behind me, but a line of open sky and a door, the color of river water. I straightened. My hands shook, but the burns no longer throbbed. Some deeper ache, older than skin, had hushed. Gathering the unburned sketch and my mother's note, I left the gutted room, descended through timber skeletons into the lawn. Morning had advanced, school traffic thickening 2 blocks down, sparrows convulsing the power lines above. I stopped at the curb. Firefighters had cordoned the site again while I wandered inside distortion. They eyed me, but did not forbid exit. Across the street, neighbors opened blinds, faces pale moons. One child held his parent's hand and pointed, asking something unheard. The parent's answer was a shrug, gesture of surrender to stories older than caution. I faced the ruin once more. The house did not move, but I sensed the pressure of its cavities easing, as though the structure accepted final collapse without need of me. A breeze threaded through blackened studs, lifting a faint odor of sap, the sweet smell of raw lumber newly exposed. I unfolded the sketch, eyes tracing the impossible Mobius stairs, the transparent walls. My mother's note fluttered against it. Yellow fades, she had written, but it also lets the blue through. The 2 papers aligned, door to sentence, so that the words became a lintel above the threshold I had drawn. In that overlay I glimpsed an architecture untouched by rot or denial. A hallway turning forever toward a door that opened inward and outward in the same motion, where color was not camouflage but passage. I folded both papers together, placed them in my jacket, and turned south toward the rental car. Ash fell from my soles, marking the pavement with grey footprints that the wind erased before I reached the end of the block. And beneath the quiet hum of morning I heard, just once, the faintest echo like water dripping steady on wood, whispering a question I could finally bear. When the fire has eaten the lie, and the house has swallowed its own ghost, will the door we carry within us remember which way is open? I drove until the ruined neighborhood dissolved in the rear view. until the skyline pared itself down to 2 lanes of asphalt and the long hush of fields. Traffic thinned, cell signal frayed into null pockets, and a quietness settled, thick enough that I almost missed the sound of my own breathing. The rental's dashboard glowed a medicinal green, counting out miles like an IV drip. The farther I went, the lighter my chest felt, though every heartbeat still cracked like a cinder underfoot. Somewhere past noon, rain arrived. Not a storm this time, but a soft, continuous weeping that blurred the landscape into watercolor. I pulled off at an abandoned rest stop, its picnic tables furred with moss, its vending machines gutted. Under the shelter's tin roof, I unfolded the 2 surviving sheets, the Mobius house sketch and my mother's note. The rain's whisper merged with the distant hiss of highway, and in that liminal murmur, the pages seemed to breathe. Homesick is a direction, not a place. I read the line again, letting its angle change inside me. Homesick, I realized, could point forward as easily as back. It was not nostalgia, it was the body's magnet turned toward a space that doesn't yet exist but insists on being found. So when I started the engine again, I didn't set a destination, I followed a sensation, an internal compass that registered color instead of coordinates. The road curved toward a small coastal town I'd never visited, the kind that smells of salt and compromised promises. Cheap motels leaned into fog, and gulls argued on lampposts like old men refusing silence. I rented a room above a shuttered convenience store. Its door, chipped and sea-blanched, had once been painted a calm, unreadable blue. That night, I unpacked no luggage, just the pages. I taped the sketch to the wall opposite the bed, then fixed my mother's slip of paper across the doorframe, so the words floated above every threshold crossing. Rain kept time on the roof, distant buoys clanged in the harbor. I fell asleep listening to them converse in watery vowels. Dream took me back to the attic leak, but the drip was slower now, echoing an almost heartbeat. I watched water course down narrow channels carved by years of patience, branding the boards with outlines of rivers. Then the boards softened, turning translucent, and moonlight poured through until the whole ceiling became an iris opening onto sky. In the dream I stepped upward, barefoot, and each plank bent into a stair that rose toward a single floating door the color of deep tide. I touched its knob that never burned. The door opened both ways at once, so that stepping through meant returning and arriving simultaneously. I woke before dawn. A hush pressed against the window, heavier than fog, as though the sea itself held its breath. I dressed and walked the dark wharf until first light bled between clouds. Fishing boats chugged out, their wakes combing the harbor flat. The air tasted of iron and beginnings. That morning I found a hardware store no bigger than a prayer. Its aisles smelled of sawdust and latent possibility. I bought a gallon of paint labeled Annapolis Blue and a cheap brush with bristles already dreaming of ruin. Back at the motel door, I worked stroke by slow stroke, the rain lending just enough silence. Each coat erased the battered beneath, coaxing a new membrane of color from grain. The work felt liturgical, load, sweep, breathe. By the third pass, the door absorbed the hue like thirsty skin, a blue deep enough to drown worry, but bright enough to hold a glint from any stray sun. When it dried, I pressed my palms against it, testing the surface. The burns stung, but did not reopen. I felt pulse meeting wood, a brief handshake between story and shelter. Then I stepped back and stared until the edges blurred and the door became simply possible. Day's rhythm shifted after that. I took temporary work, night stocker in a grocery, deckhand on a harbor tour, nothing permanent, enough to keep breath and body aligned. Evenings I returned to the motel, where I began redrawing houses. This time I didn't start with facades or floor plans. I started with doors, each a different blue, each opening onto rooms I let remain undefined. Around them I sketched corridors that bent like currents, windows that inhaled moonlight and exhaled birdsong. Some walls floated free of physics, some floors held trapdoors into clouds. I drew until the pencil smudged the page silver and my wrist hummed with a pain that felt like growth. I mailed the first batch to my mother, care of the address I'd traced through public records, a retirement complex 3 states west, its brochure promising sunny commons and purposeful quiet. In my letter I asked her what color doors the building wore. I told her how the yellow had finally burned down, how beneath the soot I'd found a note that still glowed. Weeks passed without reply. Then a small envelope arrived, no letter, just a paint chip taped to cardstock, Periwinkle Dawn. On the back she had written, "Maybe try this one next." I placed her chip above my desk, beside the Mobius sketch. The 2 blues conversed, one deep as receding tide, the other pale as first light. Their dialogue felt like a tide line, ebb and flow, leaving shells of possibility. One night, months later, I dreamed the house with the transparent walls again. This time, the corridors populated themselves with footsteps. Not Hank's, not my 9-year-old echo, but unfamiliar gates, each carrying its own cadence of intent. Strangers moved through, touching the blue lintel as they passed, leaving smudges of dust like cosmic fingerprints. They walked on, yet the house never crowded. It expanded with every visitor, breathing new rooms into existence where hallways once looped. When I woke, I realized the structure was no longer closed on itself. The Mobius twist had relaxed, allowing a continuous path outward. I spent that day on the pier, sketching the dream's shift with charcoal swipes that streaked my palms the color of storm. An elderly tourist paused, watching over my shoulder. "That doorway," she said, voice a brittle leaf, "looks like it might forgive." I offered the page to her. She hesitated, then took it, eyes glistening. She folded the drawing as one might fold a fragile map, tucking it into the heart pocket of her coat. Her thanks was a breath more than a word. When she walked away, I felt a portion of weight lift, as though the drawing had been carrying a stone. Winter bled into coastal spring, a brief salt-sweet exhalation before summer's glare. I moved from the motel to a rental cottage 2 blocks inland, its porch sagging like an exhausted question. The landlord offered a discount if I repainted the front. I chose periwinkle dawn for the door, laid brush to wood at sunrise, watched the color bloom like diluted lavender. As I painted, I hummed an old rhythm, attic leak cadence now tempered to lullaby. When the final coat dried, I stood barefoot on the porch and listened. No hum of phantom electricity, no drip of rot water, only seabirds rehearsing their imperfect harmonies. The door held its breath and mine. I stepped inside. The cottage smelled of new gypsum and last night's tide. Light spilled across bare pine floors, pooling in shallow ripples. I pinned the Mobius sketch to the wall beside the kitchen window, its transparent walls catching dawn. Beneath it, on a small shelf, I placed the molten lead puddle, once a soldier, now a reflective scar. It glinted like a frozen drop of night, reminding me that what burns away can sometimes harden into witness rather than wound. I traced the doorway with a fingertip. The paint felt cool, alive. In its sheen I saw neither the jaundice of denial nor the cobalt of escape, but a softer shade. Transition's own bloom, the color that hovers when darkness lifts but day has not yet named itself. And it struck me then. Every house is a verb disguised as a noun, a motion of sheltering that only appears still. Doors are simply the joints where that motion flexes, where past and future trade silences. To repaint a door is to conjugate the structure in a new tense, one that includes return without surrender. Outside, the evening wind changed direction, sending gulls keening inland. I opened the periwinkle door and let air sweep the room, lifting dust that had lain nameless on the sill. The breeze fluttered my mother's paint chip, rattled the pages on the wall, tugged gently on the memory of yellow until even its residue felt lighter. I stood there, half inside, half out, balanced on the hinge like a held breath, and I asked the sea salt air the only question that mattered among unburned futures. If a door can keep opening, who will I become each time I choose to cross? Summer bent toward its inward hinge without warning, the way a tide pivots mid-breath. By late August, the little coastal town exhaled tourists like spent seeds. Boardwalk lights flickered out one by one, and gulls reclaimed the railings with priestly solemnity. I slipped easily into that hush, letting night shifts at the grocery compress into muscle memory, while days dilated into listening to surf-grinding shale, to wind-combing dune grass, to the nearly inaudible tick of paint curing on my periwinkle door. But unfinished stories are like unfinished storms. Pressure keeps building whether or not clouds comply. A certified letter arrived from the city where Juniper Street once curved, a terse notice that the lot had been cleared of debris. Redevelopment phase to commence October. They offered me first refusal on one of the new units. Introductory pricing, sunrise palette, open concept interiors. I laughed, a startled bark that tasted of brine, and set the envelope aside, unreadable as driftwood runes. That night, a power outage rolled across town, flattening even the lighthouse beam. In the sudden black, the cottage's rooms felt unmoored, drifting from their hinges. I found a candle and struck a match. Flame flared, parchment thin, and every object drew a double shadow, one truthful, one speculative. The molten lead relic on the shelf glittered, catching candlelight in warped reflections that looked almost like windows. Windows. I hadn't drawn any in weeks, only doors, each new hue attempting a different conjugation of return, so I set the candle beside a blank page, let wax breath pool, and sketched a single casement swung wide. Beyond its frame I penciled no landscape at all, just blankness, bright and waiting. The page felt perilously light, as if it might lift and sail away on its own intent. When the power jolted back, the sudden hum of the refrigerator felt obscene. I left the cottage and walked the moonless shoreline, shoes in hand, surf-licking ankles. The hiss of water on sand repeated an old refrain. Basement leak, attic drip, yet gentled now into a lull that tutored breathing. Above, clouds tore open to reveal a seam of stars sewing distance to distance. Watching that silvery suture, I realized I no longer mistook silence for punishment. It had become invitation. 2 days later, I drove inland to visit my mother. The retirement complex sat on a gentle hill, its corridors echoing with wheel roll and soft television laughter. Her door, yes, periwinkle dawn, immaculate. She opened it wearing the shade in her eyes too, some ironic twinkle that said she knew exactly what color can and cannot mend. We spoke over tepid tea, sentences tiptoeing around the crater of Hank and the fire, until at last she set her cup down with a porcelain click. "I used to think hope was a paint you could roll on thick enough to hide everything underneath," she said. I waited. "Now I think it's primer," she amended, a wry smile lifting one corner of her mouth. "Nothing more, nothing less. A surface the next color might cling to." She pressed a small envelope into my palm. Inside, another paint chip. This one unnamed, the shade of dawn fog where sea and sky blur. On the back she'd written only a date, next April, and a question mark. We understood each other. The cottage lease expired that month. Doors, once more, were preparing to imagine themselves open. I drove away beneath a sunset loud with migrating geese. Their ragged V cut southeast, toward warmth, toward a story they'd inherited by feather and star. I wondered if any of them felt homesick for places they'd never nested, yet somehow remembered. That evening, back at the coast, I stood before my periwinkle door, with a brush in one hand, and my mother's new chip in the other. I could already smell the salt fog color exhaling from its future tin, but I didn't paint, not yet. Instead, I removed the door from its hinges entirely and carried it to the shoreline. Propping it upright in the damp sand, I let twilight pour through the empty frame, while waves patted its lower panels. People strolling the beach paused, puzzled. Some stepped through, laughing, as if it were a stunt. I didn't stop them. Their laughter threaded into the evening air like bright twine, securing possibility to the ordinary. When the tide finally nudged the threshold, I lifted the door and bore it back inside, seawater streaming off its lower edge. A door that had tasted salt, I decided, might never harbor rot. I slept with windows open, breeze riffling the sketches taped across my walls. In dream, I saw the Mobius house one final time. Only now its corridors were lined with doors in every conceivable hue, yellow among them, no longer sickly, but rich as marigold. The loop had straightened into a gentle spiral, rising and widening. At its center, no room, only sky. Morning cracked its egg-yolk sun over the horizon. I woke before the first gull cry, slid the salt-kissed door onto sawhorses, and began sanding, slow, deliberate, erasing weather's scabs. Wood grain emerged, fresh and fragrant. With each pass, the sound of paper against surface reminded me of distant surf, of attic leaks, of the heartbeat now steady beneath my scars. I dipped the brush into the fog-colored paint. The first stroke drank the new tint greedily, and in that moment the grain looked almost like a topographical map. Valleys, ridges, hidden rivers. As color bloomed across the panel, I felt something ease beneath the sternum, as if a long-latched valve finally turned. Homesick, I realized, had pivoted again. No longer direction or place, but velocity, the rate at which grief becomes space. By the time gulls began their quarrels, the door gleamed with dawn fog hush. I rehung it, stepped back, and waited through one full breath, then another. The cottage inhaled light, exhaled a new silence, chromatic, resonant, edged with promise. And so, with hands still streaked in clouds of pigment and heart balanced on the thin ledge between threshold and horizon, I asked the air a final question. Quiet, curious, without fear. When color itself learns to navigate the dark, how many shades of becoming might we yet discover on the other side of every door?